Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Mangala Samaravira, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka, for this so kind presentation. Mr. Minister of Education and Culture, Secretaries, Members of Parliament, Excellencies, Ambassadors, dear colleagues from the United Nations system. I'm deeply honored to speak here in this audience at the Lakshman Kardigamar Institute for International Relations and Strategic Studies. Lakshman Kardigamar was a great statesman and politician. He was a man of intellect, a man renowned for his wit, but he was most of all a great humanist, devoted to human rights and equal dignity, committed to peace in Sri Lanka on the basis of respect and dialogue. And I would say committed to UNESCO, because your Honorable Minister just mentioned how often he cited those lines of our Constitution, who we will never be tired to repeat. Since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed, and that peace cannot be construed only on the basis of economic and financial arrangements. We need the intellectual and moral solidarity of humankind. And this is precisely what Lakshman Kardigamar wanted to bring to the country, to the peace process, and to the world. And I think he believed profoundly that in Sri Lanka, as a country united in rich cultural, ethnic, and religious diversity, this is possible. It was in 1999 when he made the proposal to the United Nations General Assembly to make Vesak Day an international day of celebration. In October 2001, speaking before the United Nations General Assembly after the terrorist attacks on September 11, he made a passionate appeal for the unity of humanity. He said, and I quote, "Let us hope such a deep sense of togetherness of all humanity at times of great crisis will continue to be pervasive." Lakshman Kardigamar was tragically cut down, but his legacy lives on vibrantly today, here in Sri Lanka, and allow me to say across the world. And this institute, I believe, is one of his legacies. Housed in this lighthouse, the institute is guided by a mission that he would no doubt have approved: to engage in independent research of Sri Lanka's international relations and strategic interests, to provide insights and recommendations that advance justice, peace, prosperity, and sustainability. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, justice, peace, prosperity, and sustainability. These values have deep roots in your country. They are interlinked and can only be taken forward together. This requires a new, comprehensive approach to human development and sustainability. I see this vision guiding the government of Sri Lanka today. Last September, before the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency President Maithripala Sirisena said, "My understanding is not to have sectorally or group-wise isolated development, but to have an inclusive model of development that is capable of uplifting development standards globally." I would call this a universal approach. And I see this as a definition of the new soft power the world needs today to respond to complex challenges that cross all borders. Because these are indeed turbulent times. Globalization is opening vast opportunities for positive change, for trade, prosperity, connectivity, cooperation, and dialogue. At the same time, we see we are living in an increasingly fragmented world. Climate change is accelerating. Poverty remains enduring, revealing deep inequalities in and between countries. Conflicts remain aflame, tearing the fabric of societies, causing humanitarian tragedies. We see the rise of extremism and violence across the world, with barbaric terrorist attacks in Paris, in Brussels, in Tunisia, in Indonesia, in Istanbul, in Iraq, in Bamako. Today, perhaps more than ever before, we must be guided by the values we share, our commitment to humanity as a single family. This is essential to taking forward the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Change Agreement. I mention both because I am convinced these must be seen as a single agenda. An agenda for human rights and dignity, an agenda for poverty eradication and sustainability. In the words of its declaration, this is an agenda of the people, by the people, and for the people. No one must be left behind, especially the most vulnerable, the most marginalized. No society stands alone. We stand together on the same planet, and we share a single destiny. The promises of the new agenda embodied a new transformative vision for peace and for the planet. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are developed in a process that involved all states, drawing on the key lessons of the Millennium Development Goals, that success requires national ownership, and that ownership means capacities. Very often, we appeal for a shift of the paradigm. We call this new agenda a paradigm shift, and I do agree. It is a paradigm shift in its commitment to inclusion and ownership. It is a paradigm shift in its global vision, bringing all countries together, developed, emerging, and developing, middle income with small island developing states. Taking this forward calls for connected action across sectors, from education to water management, to empowering girls and women, linking progress in human development with effective measures against climate change. I know the commitment of Sri Lanka to the 2030 Agenda. We see this in the will that guides Sri Lanka's unity government. We see this in the commitment to Yapaya Alnaya, I may not pronounce it right, the good governance that underpins public policy. We see this in measures to promote reconciliation on the basis of dialogue and justice, to provide opportunities for a better future for all. We see this in the new focus on empowering girls and women. Sri Lanka has suffered the terrible costs of 26 years of conflict. The country is guided today by a new vision of peace built on respect, on dialogue, on promoting a new horizon for all women and men, drawing on Sri Lanka's rich and great history of diversity and tolerance. I wish to pledge here UNESCO support to Sri Lanka in all its efforts to consolidate gains, to catalyze new progress. This starts with Sustainable Development Goal 4, to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, which UNESCO did so much to shape. Our starting point here, ladies and gentlemen, is quite clear. Education is a human right, essential to dignity and empowerment. It is a multiplier for more inclusive and sustainable development. In advancing gender equality, poverty eradication, sustainability, it is a force for peace. Whether in Tokyo or Nairobi, Asuncion or New York, educating a child is the smartest investment in society can make in its future, in lasting peace. The evidence is overwhelming. UNESCO's forthcoming Global Education Monitoring Report shows that, on average, every additional year of education boosts a personal income by 10% and increases a country's GDP. Working with member states and partners, UNESCO is leading forward the Education 2030 Framework for Action. We're working to reposition literacy through the creation of a global alliance for literacy. UNESCO has long worked with the government of Sri Lanka to bolster its efforts to ensure quality education for all, to train teachers, to deepen innovation in vocational and professional training. And I know that Sri Lanka has a success story to tell when we speak about literacy and when we speak about education. What we need now to move on, it's about the quality. And this is where the South Asian Center for Teacher Development and MEPE, a UNESCO Category 2 center, comes into the forefront. And I will participate tomorrow in a forum on quality education through effective teacher development together with the Honorable Minister of Education, because we do believe that teachers hold the key to the quality of education. We see the same commitment in Sri Lanka's National Institute of Education, whose Open School program was awarded the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize on International Literacy Day last year. This engagement is expressed in Sri Lanka's work to harness new technologies to drive innovation in education, especially in the higher education. And I was particularly pleased yesterday, during my visit to Kandy, to have an extremely rich, fruitful exchange with the faculty staff in the oldest and still the biggest university in Kandy of Sri Lanka, to discuss the interface between higher education and scientific research, between the scientific research, the science, and the policy, which was also a subject that we just discussed this morning at a big conference and a big science forum with scientists organized by the Honorable Minister of Science and Technology. And I look forward to deepening UNESCO's partnership with Sri Lanka, especially in advancing education for peace and human rights, education for global citizenship, education for sustainable development, to bolster reconciliation through new skills for dialogue, respect, and solidarity. Empowering girls and women must be a special priority. Sri Lanka is participating in UNESCO's project, supporting by a China Hainan Airlines funding trust, to enhance girls' and women's right to quality education through gender-sensitive policymaking, teacher development, and pedagogy. Because I do believe this is not simply a human rights issue. It is about building more just and inclusive societies. The benefits reach all across the board. The IMF estimates that if women participated in the labor market to the same extent as men, GDP could increase by 5% in the United States, by 9% in Japan, and by 27% in India. We know this, but being born a girl remains a primary cause for exclusion today. Too many girls are still forced to work, married off, taken from school. The figures are staggering. Only 60% of countries have achieved parity in primary education and only 38 in secondary. 62 million girls are denied the right to a basic education. This throws a shadow over all development. We must change this situation. And the good news is that we can, by focusing on access, on the quality of education, on the transition to secondary education, on the conditions of learning, on teacher training. These goals guide our UNESCO action in moving forward with the 2030 agenda. This includes encouraging girls and young women to learn science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The sciences have pride of place in the 2030 agenda. Sustainability will depend indeed on the capacity of governments to place science and innovation at the heart of national strategies. It is our UNESCO's role to support them at every level through policy frameworks, through capacity building, through scientific cooperation. And this precisely was the reason of our important Science Forum this morning, where UNESCO pledged support for the launching of a new Science and Technology Center here in Colombo. Of course, Sri Lanka is a founding member of the South and Central Asian Man and Biosphere Network, hosting 4 UNESCO biosphere reserves at platforms for biodiversity, conservation, and sustainability in action. Science education and education for sustainable development are core parts of our cooperation, building capacity also to implement the Convention on Biological Diversity. A similar holistic approach guides our work to advance mangrove conservation through awareness raising, education and research, community livelihood activities, especially for women. All this seeks to bolster the resilience of societies, to give them every chance to meet goals they set for themselves. This must start with the respect for human rights as the compass direction for all action. I know the importance this message carries in Sri Lanka. This is especially important in the process for reconciliation and dialogue. In this context, deepening social inclusion and cohesion has never been so important, especially for young people shouldering the heaviest burdens of change, including for migrants and displaced people. This matters at the national level, but it matters also at the city and community level. And I know there are 5 Sri Lankan cities in the International Coalition of UNESCO for Inclusive and Sustainable Cities. Sustainable Development Goal 16 sets the bar high to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. The rule of law, good governance, democratic practices, as you rightfully mentioned, Honorable Minister, these are essential for healthy society and sustainable development. And I wish to commend the government of Sri Lanka for its commitment to freedom of expression and the safety of journalists, another core mandate of UNESCO. Let me underline the importance of Sri Lanka's recent Right to Information Act, which provides access to public information to all women and men. UNESCO has worked with Sri Lanka to support media ethics and self-regulation, to promote gender equality in and through the media, to build capacity to report on poverty, to promote the right to information. I see these as soft power drivers for resilience and peace. This is the importance also of promoting cultural heritage and diversity, as enablers and drivers of sustainable development, as platforms for dialogue and reconciliation. Sri Lanka has 8 sites inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List, and I had the chance to visit the ancient city of Polonnaruwa and the Sigiriya Rock Fortress, as well as the sacred city of Kandy. I know the archives of the Dutch East India Company are inscribed on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. All this richness, cultural richness and heritage testified to the wealth of your history. I would say the rich tapestry of your traditions, beliefs, and contribution to humanity's culture. And I noticed this during my visits, that this heritage has special meaning for the people of Sri Lanka. It carries outstanding universal value for all women and men as part of the ties that draw humanity together. I'm convinced we can deepen our partnership here to make the most of Sri Lanka's cultural heritage and diversity, tangible and living, on the world stage and as forces for reconciliation, dialogue, economic growth, and social inclusion. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe 2015 marked a true turning point. Our task now, I would say our responsibility, is to do everything to translate promises into realities, to ensure no one is left behind, to eradicate poverty, to protect the planet, to build more lasting peace. Tackling complex challenges requires determination and cooperation. It requires leadership, most of all. This is the true test of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, and I wish to thank again the government of Sri Lanka for its leadership, including at UNESCO, where Sri Lanka is a prominent member of the Executive Board. And I would like to recognize the presence also of the Ambassador Permanent Delegate of Sri Lanka to UNESCO. And I would like to pledge to you UNESCO's absolute commitment to support the government and the people of Sri Lanka to craft a more peaceful future for all. Let me come back again to the words that His Excellency President Sirisena said last September at the United Nations. Our new vision involves achieving the twin objectives of sustainable development and reconciliation. A fundamental requirement in this context is dealing with the past honestly and building a modern Sri Lankan nation. Rest assured, UNESCO will work with you every step of this important and responsible rebuilding the country's future. Thank you for your attention.